Hey, it's David Drake, and I'm sitting here with Kathy Emerson in my house around my kitchen table, fighting with my financials because that's what I do.
Because that's what we do. I'm Kathy Emerson. I have my own company, Kathy Emerson, LLC, and I'm a CPA. I help people set up their books and records to meet reporting requirements, and so they understand what's going on for their business. Because you know your numbers, you know your business.
Okay, so the goal of today's meeting is to outline a couple of things. We're going to discuss how to properly report your income and expenses, where these numbers show up, and why you need to know them.
When we start to set up your company's business, you start with a chart of accounts. Your chart of accounts should really be set up to work with how you need to report those numbers. So what we're looking at for a nonprofit is a short form and a long form for reporting. You want to talk more about that?
Right, the short form for reporting is if you make under $25,000 in gross revenue in the state of Florida. If you make under $25,000, you can be exempt from the cost of registering in the states that require it. The paperwork that's required in the state of Florida for a small charity is a different form entirely. So we're going to have the short form for the small charity and the long form for the bigger charity. Anybody who's filing a 990, anybody who's making over $25,000 is going to file the long form. There's another video for that. The state of Florida puts together, they have a Check a Charity site. Several different states have the same similar service where they put registered charities on a site so that the general public and investors can go and learn more about the financial history of that charity. So if you log into State of Florida Check a Charity, you are going to find this form. I pulled up one of my favorite charities, Swim Safe Forever, as an example. And basically what this form does is it shows you a breakdown ratio of program service expenses, administrative expenses, and fundraising expenses so that you as a consumer can see and judge how you think the charity is performing.
Okay, so what we're going to look at is how they really calculate these percentages when you're talking about the program service expenses, the administrative expense, and the fundraising expenses. You'll see the numbers 40%, 22%, and 38%. These percentages refer to the total of all the expenses. So the way to increase your program services expenses based on this formula is to decrease your administrative expenses and your fundraising expenses, and that's what you're looked at as a nonprofit. How much of these expenses are actually going to support your program. So let's take another look at what really goes into these expenses. When we have program services expenses, that's what supports the program. If you have management in general, that's expenses that you have that are not supporting the program. And then fundraising, of course, you're having fundraising expenses. If you go to the top of the form, there's the ability to net the expenses that are associated with the revenue of fundraising into the revenue line. You're netting your revenue to be less. The effect of that is that you're actually removing that from the expense line that's management in general. So this management in general is supporting for program. If you're actually using it to support fundraising, or if you're selling product and you have a cost of those products, you're going to put it up here. By putting it up here, it's not down here. These management in general total and fundraising total would then be lower and have a total lower expenses. Your program services expenses will then divide against a lower total expenses. You'd have a higher percentage of program services expenses, which is then published on the website.
Okay, so if you sat through that and were as confused as I was, I'm going to have Kathy break it down a little bit again. Okay, so basically, the name of the game here is to allocate as much of my expense to a specific fundraising event so I get it out of the total expenses line. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Why is that important?
That's important because of how the percentages are calculated when your not-for-profit is looked at to say how much of your spending actually goes to support your
Okay, so
program.
We'll go back to those forms again. Let's go back to this magical form. Okay, so these are the expenses, the program service expense, the administrative expense, and the fundraising expense that the state sets up for individuals who are investigating you to see how efficient you are with your money. It's their donation, it's their money. They want to know where they're investing their money and what you're going to do with it. If they feel too much is going towards administrative expenses, then they're probably going to donate to somebody else.
If you're being evaluated based on how much spending goes into your program, then you ultimately want to show that in the numbers. So if your program expense is 40% of all of your spending goes to the program, 40% of that is allocated, that's what you're judged on. In this calculation, the first columns are what was reported. If it could be deemed that part of that fundraising effort was really specific for special fundraising events, then it's not reported in that expense line. You are just putting that general fundraising activity down there. So this is what the adjusted numbers look like. Now we have $250 in fundraising. My total expenses are less. My program expenses are the same, but now they are 62% of my total fundraising, total expenses.
The bottom line is, as a nonprofit, I'm being judged on the Check a Charity site by the percentages that are displayed. And I want to make sure that I'm allocating the funds to the correct column so those percentages are correct.
Yeah, so those percentages are correct. So what's hurting you is if you have special fundraising expenses that are listed under just general expenses, that is going to cause your percentage of your program spending to be less. So get those fundraising expenses that are associated with special events out of that category. Put that in the top part of the form.
Okay. We've covered how financial reporting requirements can differ depending on your charity's size and state, how third-party sites use your financial data to reflect the performance of your charity, and how to properly allocate expenses in order to accurately reflect your charity's performance. I know it's a dry subject, but we hope you found it helpful. On behalf of Donate Smarter and Kathy Emerson, know your numbers to know your business. I'm David Drake. Thanks for doing all you do.